Bird, they were in a hard cap in the NBA. And when you look at this and bringing it back home, Adam Silver, Asia Wilson, Angel Reese, Brianna Stewart, who are the superstars of the WNBA, but especially for Caitlin because she has such brand marketing deals, probably averaging $30 to $50 million a year. The bird rights gives a team an opportunity to re-sign its best player and not be restricted by the...
It's a regular evening at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, the kind of night where the crowd files in, the music plays, and everyone expects the usual rhythm of a WNBA game. Fans are grabbing their seats, checking their phones, catching up with the person next to them. Nothing unusual, nothing out of the ordinary. And then Caitlin Clark steps up to the microphone. The arena goes quiet, not gradually, immediately, like someone hit a mute button on the entire building. Thousands of people, all holding their breath at the same time, all looking in the same direction, all waiting for the same thing. Because when Caitlin Clark speaks publicly like this, you pay attention. That's not a marketing line. That's just what her presence does to a room. What she said next didn't just shock the people inside that arena. It sent shockwaves through every sports newsroom, every basketball podcast, every group chat between WNBA fans across the country.
Great run, and it's fun to watch. I think I watched Indiana State and Iowa, Caitlin Clark play about the same last year.
You called her garbage compared to Caitlin Clark.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, I've been watching from afar, and understanding just how much of a power she is.
Because she announced something that nobody, not the analysts, not the journalists, not the most plugged-in insiders, had seen coming. The Indiana Fever had a new head coach, and that coach was Larry Bird. Take a moment with that. Larry Bird, 3 NBA championships, 3 MVP awards, 12 All-Star appearances. A man whose name is written into the very fabric of basketball history. A man who grew up in the small town of French Lick, Indiana, worked his way to Indiana State University, and then stood across from Magic Johnson in the 1979 NCAA championship game, one of the most watched and celebrated college basketball games ever played. That game didn't just define Bird's legacy. It announced to the entire country that something special was happening in Indiana basketball. And now, decades later, Indiana was calling on him again. But before we can truly understand why this moment mattered, why it hit so differently, why it felt like more than just a coaching announcement, we have to go back. We have to talk about what the Indiana Fever looked like before Caitlin Clark walked through the door, because that context is everything. Not long ago, the Indiana Fever were a team that most casual sports fans could tell you very little about. That's not a criticism, it's just the reality of where they stood.
Despite losing 1 million viewers from last year, is that she has risen the entire league.
Caitlin Clark that they're mad about. Now they're pissed off because people are willing to pay up to see Caitlin Clark.
They were a franchise grinding through seasons without much national attention, playing in a league that was still fighting every single day to claim the mainstream spotlight it deserved. Gainbridge Fieldhouse had nights where the crowd felt thin. Season ticket sales were modest. The team was competitive enough, but they weren't a cultural conversation. Then Caitlin Clark arrived as a rookie and everything changed, not slowly, not gradually, almost overnight. Attendance at Gainbridge Fieldhouse didn't just increase, it exploded. Season ticket sales jumped by more than 400%. Let that number sink in. 400%, that's not a bump, that's a complete transformation of the fanbase. Seats that had often gone empty were now impossible to get. Fans were traveling from other states just to watch her play in person. The arena that once felt quiet on certain nights was now electric from tip-off to the final buzzer.
Great run, and it's fun to watch. I think I watched Indiana State and Iowa, Caitlin Clark play about the same last year. So I was watching.
The business side of things followed immediately. Corporate sponsors who had been sitting on the fence about investing in women's basketball suddenly saw the opportunity clearly. Brands big and small came knocking because they understood something simple. Wherever Caitlin Clark went, eyes followed. And in the world of marketing, that is everything. The Fever went from a team looking for visibility to a team that brands were actively competing to be associated with. On social media, the impact was just as dramatic. Every assist, every deep three, every moment of Clark doing something that made you grab the person next to you, it was clipped, shared, and viewed millions of times. She wasn't just growing the Fever's fanbase. She was growing the entire WNBA's audience, pulling in people who had never watched a women's basketball game in their lives and converting them into genuine fans. But here's what made Clark's situation genuinely unusual, and this is something that rarely gets discussed clearly. Because of what she meant to the franchise commercially and culturally, Clark's influence inside the organization extended beyond what most players ever experience. She wasn't just a player being told what to do by management. She had a voice. A real voice, in conversations about team direction, about strategy, about the kind of basketball the Fever were going to play. That level of organizational influence for someone in her first years as a professional is almost unheard of in any sport, let alone in the WNBA. She wasn't just the face of the franchise. She was actively shaping it, which brings us to Stephanie White. Let's be careful here because this conversation deserves nuance. Stephanie White is a capable, experienced basketball coach. She knows the game. She has credentials. This isn't a story about someone who didn't belong in the role. But here's what became increasingly clear as the season progressed. Clark's natural style of play and White's coaching system were pulling in opposite directions. And when you have a generational talent like Caitlin Clark, that kind of friction doesn't stay quiet for long. Clark herself spoke about it openly. In a podcast interview, she talked about the challenges of operating within a system that didn't always feel like it was built for the way she plays. Think about what makes Clark exceptional on a basketball court. It's her instincts, her willingness to take risks that most players wouldn't even consider, the way she can read a defense in real time and make a pass that nobody else in the building saw coming. She plays with creativity and aggression and a kind of improvisational intelligence that is genuinely rare, and that style requires freedom. It requires a coach who looks at those instincts and says, yes, trust that, go with it, we're building around what you naturally do. Clark described games where she felt that freedom being restricted, moments where she was trending toward a triple-double and found herself being reined in rather than encouraged to push further. She talked about a specific game against New York where she was nudged toward safer, more conservative plays rather than the aggressive, high IQ decisions that define her at her best. There was a fourth quarter moment where she made a mistake, the kind of calculated risk that sometimes doesn't pay off, and she was immediately benched. White framed it as a teaching moment. Clark experienced it as a disruption to her momentum and her flow. And this is the core of the tension. Clark's game is momentum-driven. It lives in rhythm. When that rhythm gets interrupted, when instinct gets second-guessed mid-game, the whole thing unravels a little. The magic that makes her must-watch television becomes harder to access. She also talked about White's tendency to slow the game down at key moments. When the Feverhead leads, the approach often shifted toward time management, protecting the advantage rather than extending it. Clark felt that this conservatism meant missed opportunities. Moments where a quick pass to an open Sophie Cunningham or Kelsey Mitchell could have produced easy buckets instead got swallowed by caution. What Clark was really describing was a fundamental philosophical difference. White's system, by Clark's account, wanted her to play more like Paige Buecher's, controlled, disciplined, methodical. And Buecher's is a brilliant player, but she is a completely different athlete with a completely different game. Trying to turn Caitlin Clark into a version of Paige Buecher's is like trying to get a sprinter to run like a marathon runner. You're not improving the athlete, you're just confusing them. The incompatibility wasn't about talent on either side. It was about fit, and in professional sports, fit matters enormously. A great coach and a great player who are philosophically misaligned will produce friction, and that friction has a cost. So the decision was made. Stephanie White was let go, and the Fever turned to someone whose basketball philosophy could not be more different from cautious, system-first coaching. Larry Bird built his entire legacy on the opposite of caution. Think about the way Bird played. The confidence, the audacity, the willingness to take the shot that nobody thought was coming in the moment that mattered most with zero hesitation. Bird didn't play within a system. Bird was the system. His whole career was built on trusting elite instincts, making creative decisions under pressure, and refusing to let the moment be bigger than the player. That's a coaching philosophy that maps directly onto what Caitlin Clark needs. But Bird isn't just bringing a playing philosophy to Indiana. He's bringing decades of hard-earned wisdom from the other side of the game, too. After his playing career ended, Bird moved into coaching and then into front office management with the Indiana Pacers. He helped build a franchise that competed at the highest levels of the NBA, reaching consecutive Eastern Conference Finals. He learned how to manage personalities, how to construct winning cultures, how to think about roster building and long-term strategy. He combined what he knew as a player with what he learned as a builder, and that combination is genuinely rare. And here's something that shouldn't be overlooked. Bird's story is Indiana's story. He didn't come from a major city or a powerhouse basketball state. He came from French Lick, a small town, a place where nobody handed him anything. He built his work ethic from scratch, carried it to Indiana State, and then took it to Boston, where he became one of the most decorated players in the history of the sport. Indiana shaped him, and in a very real sense, he shaped Indiana basketball in return. When Larry Bird walks into a practice facility wearing an Indiana Fever shirt, that means something. Not just to the players in the room, though it absolutely means something to them, but to every fan in the state, to every young girl who plays basketball in Indiana, to every person who has watched this team and wanted to believe that something special was coming. This isn't just a coaching hire, it's a statement. Let's zoom out for a moment and look at the bigger picture, because this story is about more than one team and one season. The WNBA has spent years pushing against the ceiling of mainstream American sports culture. The talent has always been there. The athleticism, the basketball IQ, the entertainment value, it was all there. What was missing was the cultural moment that would make people pay attention in the way they pay attention to the NBA or college basketball. Caitlin Clark was that moment. Her arrival didn't just boost the Fever. It shifted something in the way people talk about women's basketball in America. She gave casual fans a reason to tune in, and she gave dedicated fans something to celebrate. The league's visibility jumped in a way that years of marketing campaigns couldn't manufacture. Now imagine pairing that energy, that momentum, that cultural gravity with a coaching mind like Larry Bird's, someone who understands winning at the highest level. Someone who knows how to build around a generational talent rather than against them. Someone whose credibility and basketball IQ demand respect from players, from media, and from the public. The Indiana Fever aren't just trying to win basketball games, they're trying to build something that lasts, a franchise identity that goes beyond one spectacular season, a program that attracts talent, develops players, and gives the WNBA a flagship team that the whole country watches. And at the center of all of it is Caitlin Clark, not just as a player but as the catalyst who set all of this in motion. Her talent started the conversation, her influence shaped the organization, and her announcement to the world signaled that Indiana was done playing small. This is what makes this moment so significant. It's not just about a coaching change, it's about what the coaching change represents. It represents an organization that is willing to make bold decisions to build around a once-in-a-generation talent. It represents the kind of ambition that the WNBA as a league needs its best franchises to have. And it represents the fact that Caitlin Clark, barely into her professional career, has already accumulated enough influence and enough credibility to be part of shaping the future of the team she plays for. That is extraordinary. By any standard in any sport, that is extraordinary. The Indiana Fever are entering a new era, one built on freedom, instinct, and the kind of aggressive, beautiful basketball that fills arenas and breaks the internet every time it happens. And it all started with Caitlin Clark stepping up to a microphone in a quiet arena and saying something nobody expected. That's the story. If you made it this far, you already know this is bigger than basketball. Drop a comment. Do you think Larry Bird is the right coach for Caitlin Clark and the Fever? Let's talk about it.